We're here because of a river, and not just any river. She spans a continent and with her tributaries forms one of the great river basins of the world. New Orleans was founded where it is because of that great river, and in time she became a magnet, attracting to her commerce and people, trade, industry, for working and for living. Around the Queen City of the Mississippi grew other smaller communities, each with its own unique blend of people, each with its own reason for being, each with its own history. In time, the legislature would call her Jefferson Parish, but she would always think of herself as the free state of Jefferson, a community as storied, as lively, and as interesting as her more famous sister, New Orleans. A community is not formed by political considerations, not by lines drawn on a map. It is rather the mixing and mingling of people that in time produces a community, the daily living together that changes a place into a home. Welcome to Jefferson Genesis, the story of our community. To the old Southern Pacific Depot in Gretna, Dr. Mary Curry of the Jefferson Historical Society brought 4 people representing 320 years of Gretna living.
Lloyd Gomez is the founder of the Gretna Historical Society, and he's from one of the pioneer families of Gretna, the Straleys. Of course, one of the Straleys founded the David Crockett Fire Company. Henry Tater was a West Bank correspondent for the Times-Picayune States Item for about 43 years, and he also is from one of the founding families of Gretna. Gladys Arrett Curry is a granddaughter of John Arrett. Louis Arrett is the son of John Arrett, the first mayor of the City of Gretna and Jefferson Parish assessor for many years, as well as police juryman.
Before our meeting at the depot, I spoke to Dr. Curry in her office for background. What was Gretna like? How did it get there? Where did it come from?
Well, for the purposes of the sesquicentennial, we're tracing Gretna's founding back to 1836, when Nicholas Noel Destrehan had surveyor Benjamin Buson do a plan for Gretna. At that time, it was called a plan for Mechanicam, and then a few years later, in about 1838, 1839, another plan was drawn by the St. Mary Market Steam Ferry Company, and that plan was known as Gretna. And over the years, they began to sort of emerge together and came out with Gretna. And then they had New Gretna and Old Gretna, and New Mechanicam and Old Mechanicam, and of course McDonoughville, which was there even longer than Gretna and Mechanicam. It seems that in the early 1900s there was a play known as Gretna Green, or A Trip to Scotland. And in that play was set in Gretna Green, Scotland, which was a place where they used to have quickie marriages. It was just over the English border. And legend has it that there were also quickie marriages in Gretna, Louisiana during that same period, and that perhaps it was nicknamed Gretna because of the play that was in town in New Orleans at the time, and because we had what was believed to be an infamous justice of the peace performing marriages. A little further research has shown, though, that during that period we really didn't have a justice of the peace performing all those marriages, and it was actually many years later, during the judgeship of George Trout, who was in the more like the 1920s. He performed 18,985 marriages in 28 years, so you could see how they would create the confusion there.
John McDonough, was he important to the history of Gretna? I know part of the town bears his name.
Yeah, John McDonough owned one of the plantations that eventually became a part of Gretna. He moved from New Orleans to the East Bank about 1815, and eventually his plantation was subdivided into the area we know as McDonoughville, which, interestingly enough, has kept its separate identity to this very day, unlike Mechanicam.
Has Gretna always been the seat of Jefferson Parish?
Gretna became the seat of Jefferson Parish in 1884. it moved from Harvey's Castle. Before that it had been, of course, on the East Bank. But in 1884, Gretna became the seat of parish government.
When did it become a city all its own?
It was incorporated in 1913. It was first incorporated as a village in 1913, and then a few months later it was incorporated as a city by taking in McDonoughville.
Was that a peaceful transition?
As I understand, it was not.
If you was a deputy from Marrero and you'd done something, you could get out of it because you was a friend of him. And if you wasn't, well, then you was in tough luck.
Well, the state government didn't come in?
This young lady's grandfather and Miss Curry's her great-grandfather, Mrs. Curry's grandfather, was the first mayor of Gretna. And they, with a physician by the name of Dr. Charles Gelke, another man by the name of Black, I forgot what his first name was, and Louis Gosselin, and a number of prominent people in town got together, and they figured it was time to change the rules around here the way Marrero was running, you see. So they got together and they formed a committee. They fought Marrero for a couple of times. One time when they had a sheriff, I think it was in 1912 or 1910, a man by the name of Faggett from McDonoughville, that's the first ward in Gretna. He ran for sheriff. Well, he had a pretty good sized family in McDonoughville. I guess you could figure on something in the neighborhood about 35, 40 votes. And after the election was held, he got 3 votes. His whole family voted again. So that's the way it was. It was balanced then, you know, not a machine. So all these folks got together and they said, these leaders, they said it was time for a change. And then there was a lot of crime committed to, a deputy could do something and he'd get by with it. They'd say, well, it was self-defense or something like that, you see. So they finally formed an organization and then they got signatures. And at that time they happened to be lucky enough to have a governor that was favorable to them, a reform governor. His name was Luther E. Hall, Governor Hall. And he was a good friend of these folks. So they got up a petition asking that this section, the first, second, and third ward of Jefferson Parish, be called the City of Gretna. So naturally the government was willing to issue the proclamation. So they formed the government, the city government, and Mr. Errett was the first mayor.
That's John Errett, the
John
school's
Errett,
name.
yeah, the school named that.
You see, they had trouble with the factions or the parties in politics. And my dad has switched from the old regulars to the Jefferson Democratic Party. And then they got a gang up together, about 4 men, which I know the names of all 4. All 4 did, but they have some ads, you see. That's why I can't mention no names. And then the sheriff at that time wanted to get rid of him. And he had his men like that, you see. That's the way it was in olden time. And then they come down and made a little disturbance. And my daddy heard the noise outside. And they got up, put a light on the house, and as soon as they put the light on the house, they started shooting at the house. And they shot the door up, so my daddy had to put a new door in the house where they shot about 50 holes through the door. And they put the lights out in the house. Then the Stumps come running down, Archie Stump, Louis Stump, Alvin Stump come running down. All the people in the neighborhood come running down to the house. Even Gladys's Ida's uncle come over to the house and he heard the shooting. He was living on Lavassier Street in Weeser's house, right over there between 4th and 5th. He come with a rifle because he knew what was coming. He come with a rifle and he shot one of them. But he didn't die. He stayed in the hospital though, but the other 3 left. They run. And well, that was all of that. And then my daddy was appointed by Luther E. Hall in 1913 as mayor of Gretna. It was in 1913. And then around about right around 1914, right here where we sit across the street, they had the militia there. And they had the militia all in the back of here, from here up to the TP depot. They had the militia here, had martial law. And that went on. And and then my daddy become mayor.
Do you remember your grandfather as mayor? Is that before your time?
Yeah, he was the first mayor of Gretna, John Arrett. And he didn't have a middle name or a middle initial. It was just John Arrett.
Do you remember ever visiting him in his office or seeing him?
Oh yeah,
at a
right up here in
big
his
affair?
courthouse. It's the city hall now, but it was the courthouse then. And Grandpa Arrett's office was in there. And he had several people working in the office, you see.
What was it like to see your grandfather as the mayor?
Well, I'll tell you what, he couldn't have gotten any more dignified than he was before he was in office, because he was dignity from top to bottom. He was a wonderful character, a wonderful man. He'd do anything in the world for people.
Was Gretna always primarily a farming, rural community with any industry over there?
Well, apparently it started out as that. The main drag in Gretna, UEP Long Avenue, once known as Copernicus Avenue, sort of a local corruption for Copernicus, the astronomer. That was all farms and dairies along there. People used to keep their chickens and their cows and their horses right in the middle of the commons or the neutral ground of Copernicus Avenue. So it started out strictly as a farming area, which I guess most places really started out as. And then the railroads came to town in the 1850s, so things began to change a bit. And then pretty early on, the Jefferson Parish police jury invited industry to come to town. And from that point on, we've had quite a bit of industry along the riverfront.
You never had nothing in Gretna back over the SP track, much business, you know what I mean? All the business was from 4th Street up to the river. Mr. Brockmeyer run that grocery store. That's what I remember, you know, on back years. And then right next to Miss Brockmeyer was a shoe shop, a shoemaker shop. And the shoemaking shop was Tony was in there. Tony Carmoni was there, but Tony Carmoni was over by Dr. Gelpy's, across from Gelpy's on Lavassier Street. You remember that, Henry?
Yeah. His house.
Benedict was a shoemaker, and right next to Benedict, Miss Jack and Mr. Favalora run a fruit stand, and at that time they used to have rabbits hanging up, they had ducks hanging up, they had coons hanging up by the tail, and you can buy all that stuff from them. And right next to them was a saloon. That was Charlie Gruce's saloon. Remember that, Henry?
Yeah.
And Charlie Gruce had a big saloon there. And he run that for years. And he had a drink that they used to call it lemon gin. And all them people from the Irish can would come over to Charlie Bruce's and buy a half pint of lemon gin and go to the dance with it and all things like that. The place next to my aunt, they had a saloon there. That's on Huey Long and 1st Street. John Boudreau used to run that years back. That was my niece's husband. No, she was my first cousin. Huh? That was my daddy's sister, daughter. You understand? Well, our husband run a ballroom there for years.
What about the Stump family?
The Stumps was on Lavassier and Foyce. They had a drugstore. It was an old-time building. And at that time, they had the ferry there. The ferry used to be on Lavassier Street, not Huey Long. But that was before my time. But I remember the Stump building, the old building, because I used to go there. We dealt there all our life with the drugs, you know, and that. And Stumps had the drugstore, and behind the drugstore, that house is still there. That house where Albert LeBoard used to live in.
No, it's going
That's
now.
going back.
And Alvin Stump had the magic hoodoo and ant paper and the big stump out there with it on, you know. And that's where he used to make the fly paper and the ant poison and all that stuff. And he had a big building in the back. But before that, Richards used to live on 4th Street. Andrew Richard and them's daddy had a meat market up in there too. There was a meat market there. And then there comes Samuel Brothers. Then after Samuel Brothers, there was O'Platic's drugstore. Then after O'Platic's drugstore, there was Viren's hardware store. Lafayette, on the next corner, Miss Google had a ballroom right across from the fertilizer. And her and Fritz Google used to run that.
Now, all of these businesses, I mean, this was just for the people living here. This wasn't any big industry.
No,
was there any big industry,
no,
any
just
big
local,
business?
local business.
Well, I'll tell you, if you wanted to buy a suit of clothes, you either had to go to Rodenstock or go to Samuel.
Yeah, that's right.
Samuel
That's right. Samuel Brothers.
You see how it is? Now, I'll tell you how it is. From 4th Street to the river, that was the town. The rest, they never had no big
That's right.
business. Now, that's all it is about 4th Street.
Our neighborhood, where I was raised, and where the fire station is made up of all principals and teachers. In other words, on one side of the fire station, you had the Kitty Straley House. On the other side, you had the Little White Ripple House. Then you had the Helen Cox, who was principal of Gretna High School. Across the street, you had Mr. Black, who was superintendent of the school board, and his wife, she was also a teacher. And all in that neighborhood were nothing but teachers, you know, and people that were connected with the school board. And I'd say 4 schools are named after the people in that neighborhood.
Crockett's about one of the oldest volunteer fire companies in the country, isn't it?
It was organized in 1841, and it has been in continuous existence. We have never failed to have a meeting in its 145, 146 years of age. And what we did, at one time, when we started having a paid chauffeur, we had one chauffeur. If he worked 24 hours a day, he got 1 day a week off. And on that day, he was off from 7 in the morning to 7 at night. And that chauffeur lived at the fire station. We'd give him a free house, free white lights and water and gas, and he stayed there continually. So, of course, if he had any children, they were born there. So I had a little boy by the name of David Crockett Lieberman. We christened him that because he was born there in the back of the fire station. So in order to have a meeting sometime, if we didn't have a quorum of men, we'd go down and take old David Crockett up, because we made him a life member. And we'd bring David Crockett up. And we have had a meeting in the whole length of service of the fire company's been in existence. And we have had plenty of disputes of other fire companies. One in Roanoke, Virginia, who disputed our title as being the oldest continuous active volunteer fire department in the United States. And we sent, unbeknown to them, a man on who was on vacation, and we gave him some extra money to reroute his vacation and pass through there. And he checked the books and went to the city hall, and he found out that they were in existence, but they changed their name 2 or 3 times. And there was some time during the World Wars that they did not meet because all the men were out, connected with the service. But we always had enough men to meet and to carry on the obligation. The fire company also sponsored, along with Bill Straley, a kite contest every year.
Tell me about Kite Day.
Yeah, we made pretty close at one time, pretty close to 2,000 kites.
Just on your own?
On our own. Bill Straley, who was a politician, he was a Jefferson Parish police chairman. He furnished the material, the string, the cypress, and the paper and everything else. And we made the kites. We had a big day, and we gave the kites away to the children. All they had to bring was their own kite tail and a string. And we had refreshments for them. At that time, Stevens was a band conductor, and he established a band over here in all the public schools. So we always had his band over. And we had a little parade and everything else.
Where was Kite Day held?
in Gretna, and it started at the David Crockett Fire Station. And that's where we made the kites. And of course, Mr. Lieber, who was our only chauffeur at that time, he didn't have anything to do. So all day long, and sometime at night, Mayor Straley, who was the mayor of the City of Gretna, Andrew Tallheim was city attorney, all the politicians and all the firemen and their wives would meet, would all make kites. And that's how we made all these kites. And it was a big day for about 4 years.
It's so hard to recreate the life of the time. I mean, we know the history, the politics, the important things that happened, but how did people live in those days?
Well, they had lots of social events, lots of clubs, lots of parties. They had Crescent Park where people would gather. There was a big dance hall there. There was also the suburban racetrack in McDonoughville where there was a lot of action.
Well, on Front Street, that was really the business places on Front Street, you know. Oplatix Drugstore, we'd go there like for sodas, and he had a deal in the front of the drugstore. He was the only one that had that until Stump opened up here on Huey Long, and he had a fountain. But that was the only fountain that they had on the side of the river, was the one that was Oplatix.
You don't mean a soda fountain?
Yeah,
yeah,
a soda fountain, And we'd go stop there on our way coming home from school and get a soda, because we'd keep some of our lunch money, you know, and buy a soda. And or something like that. Well, I mean, that's the way the people live then.
You had a hand, or at least your aunt had a hand, in the first carnival parade ever held in Gretna, ever held in Jefferson Parish, I believe.
Well, no, I wouldn't say the only one in Jefferson Parish, but say it was the first in Gretna.
Okay.
Now, that was not an aunt of mine, that was Lily White Ripple.
Oh.
She was the principal of Gretna Primary #1 School, which is where the old school board office was that they just moved out of, on Huey Long and 5th Street, 6th Street. So, what she did, she knocked a section of a door out, and a fellow by the name of Dennis Gidry and myself and a couple of the older boys, we built 6 floats. We used paper mache, and we used a watercolor to paint them, and we made a float for each grade in the school. And then we would borrow the 4-wheel push carts from Southern Cotton Oil, pick the floats up and put them on, and we'd use the Boy Scouts to push them. And we'd have a big parade. And it was quite a day because every one of the pupils would mask. Some would ride the float, we put 3 or 4 on the float, and all the rest would walk around it, you know. And every one of the 6th grades in the school participated in their on that carnival parade.
We were talking about Crescent Park a little earlier. What do you remember about that?
Well, I tell you see the Crescent Park, you see the N.K. Fairbanks was on 1st Street, and it used to take that whole square. And and you had to walk up on 1st Street. N.K. Fairbanks had a nice plank walk to walk up, and the Crescent Park was a regularly, it wasn't no hall, it was something like Tyler's. Uptown there were trees in there and that. It was built like that. It had a nice top to it, and it had a low sides, and they had benches all around. And they used to give dances up there.
Like a pavilion.
Yeah, pavilion.
And they had a lot of trouble up there. They had some killing up there too. Used to go on at Crescent Park.
What about the streetcar going to school?
Oh Lordy, the streetcar would go broop like this on the. It would go up and down on a railroad track, and you didn't know whether it was going to miss the next jump or not. You know, and you'd come falling out. But
Where did the streetcar run?
it ran up on Front Street, right in front of the
Ferry?
the ferry. It started off at the ferry, and it went down to, well, not too far down. It went to the beginning of Algiers. Because they used to have trouble with the people in Algiers. They used to always throw rotten eggs and everything else at the people from Gretna and all. You know, they had all kinds of things going
Tell
on.
them how much it cost to get on that streetcar.
A nickel.
Why were the people in Algiers throwing rotten eggs?
I don't know. They never did care. They thought that the people from Gretna were smart alecks or something. I don't know, but they never did have too much use for the people and the people in Gretna That was just the same thing with them. It was just they didn't like the ones from Algiers either because we thought that they were smart alecks too, and they were.
So Gretna had to get some police. So they had, I got one fella from St. Charles Parish, his name was Fredericks. They got Barbush from New Orleans, he got killed. They had Ruiz from New Orleans, and they had George Sadler from Marrero. Them was the 4 new officers they had, you see. But they had policemen here too, you see. And that went on, and Barbush, he got killed right at the next corner on Copernicus Avenue. See, this Huey Long at that time was Copernicus Avenue. And then they had a club there, they used to call that the Poor Boy Social Club. And they killed him right there by the Poor Boy Social Club. And he was on one corner shooting, and the 2 policemen was at one corner across, and one's across the street. And 2 was shooting at one. And the one guy was shooting, of course I don't want to call his name, he killed Warbush, and the other cop, he jumped over the fence at the next corner. There was 400 Newton Street. That's where my daddy was living when he was mayor. And he told my daddy, he said, they killed Barbush, and I run out of bullets, and I run to your house. And that was going on, you see, like that. So then they had the Sunday law. In other words, they had Sunday law. Saturday night, 12 o'clock, the Crockett's bell would ring, and also Mechanic's bell would ring. And everybody had to close the ballroom. So this policeman that got killed, he used to work at the fertilizer. He used to beat rocks. Well, your Uncle Bill used to work. He used to beat rocks. And he went to the ballroom about 9 o'clock. That ballroom was on 2nd and Newton. He went up to that ballroom and told the owner, at 12 o'clock, when the bell rings, you close them doors. He says, well, I ain't gonna close my doors. So he said, well, if you don't close them, I'm gonna close them for you. And that policeman paid that man's month rent of that building. And when the bells rang, he went around, he went up there and he was open, and he went in there and told him, you got a hard hit, why didn't you shut the doors? He went in the ballroom and he shut the doors. When he turned around to go to the door to shut the doors, they had 2 doors, one on Newton Street and one on 2nd Street. And when he went to shut the door on Newton Street, he reached behind the bar and got his pistol, and he shot him right in the back and killed him.
It was dangerous to live in Gretna.
He went to jail. He went to jail. He went to jail. He stayed in jail a while. And you know how a jury is fixed. A mistrial. And a mistrial, they don't try you no more. Just had to get one in there, was a mistrial. And they had a mistrial in the jury. So he left from here, the guy that killed him, he left from here, and he moved to Chicago.
Well, the parish didn't have an official journal at that time, I guess. And this man operated this paper on 2nd Street between Lavoisier and Newton Street, in the rear portion of what was the Gretna post office. And it was the post office was only a 1-story building, and the post office had the office in the front. You had to go to the post office to get your mail in those days. There was no mail delivered. And in the back of that post office was the office for this newspaper, you see, the Courier.
How often did it come out?
Come out once a week. Well, then they sold out, and then there was paper bought over. The Hildebrands continued operating for a while, but then they changed. They had new ownership, some new stockholders in it, and then they called it the Jefferson Democrat. Well, the Jefferson Democrat was operated by the Hildebrands for a while, and then finally the Cox family took it over. Now the Coxes were some cousins of the Hildebrands, and old George Cox, for a number of years after Cox died, his wife took it over. Old man Cox's wife. But she operated for a while with her son, Ashton, and then when she died, well, then Ashton took it over.
It was still a weekly?
It was still a weekly.
What kind of stories did they cover in the newspaper back in those days?
Local events, Mr. and Mrs. John Brown are the happy parents of a baby boy or something like that. Something like that. Joe Smith's houseboy home.
How far back are we going?
I guess you go back to about 1880.
So the parish had been incorporated for about 50 years?
Well, the parish, yeah. The City of Gretna was only since 1913.
You were a newspaperman for what, 50 years or more?
No, 43 years.
43. Well, I was close.
Yeah, I was 7 years different.
Did you ever write for the Jefferson Democrat, or was that before your time?
Well, the Jefferson Democrat used to copy some of the stuff I wrote in the States Picayune. That's how they got some of their news. Ashton Cox, in later years, he wasn't too anxious to get around and get in there. Oh, let it go. What you got today? On this weekly paper, you see. But
People don't understand nowadays what an epidemic was.
Oh, yeah.
And I would imagine that one of the stories you had a hand in covering was
Yeah,
the Spanish
that was-
flu epidemic.
Yeah,
What was it
yeah.
like to live there?
it was pretty tough, I guarantee you. You never know when you'd hear the next door neighbor was dead or something like that. The school down here, the school board office, Jefferson Parish School, well, it's not the office anymore, they moved it, but it's empty now. But I understand they moved the headquarters up to
Manhattan.
Well, this building was erected in 1911, and flu epidemic, I think it was in 1950 or something.
1918, because my dad was
18,
4 years old when his mother died.
Yeah. So they had to close the schools down, churches had to close down, they had to shut everything up. And then there were so many people sick that they couldn't send them. There was no hospitals on this side of the river at that time. So they had to use the school as a hospital, as a school on UA Long Avenue. And there was dozens of people brought there every day, and that was at the hospital. And the Hook and Ladder Cemetery, that's that old cemetery down on Newton Street, you know, right in Newton and 10th. I remember, I was, like I said, I was 19 years old then, and we'd walk around the cemetery, and there was caskets laying on the sidewalk outside the cemetery fence. The sextons had all they could do to bury the dead, and they'd pile up on them so much that they'd have to lay the caskets out on the sidewalk by the cemetery, and they worked until the nighttime burying the dead, you know. I had an aunt of mine that died in the school over here. Anyway, she was one like our friend Miss Vera said, she was one of the millers. One of the miller fans. And but that was tough. And,
Was it ever so bad that they had to put people in mass graves, like during the yellow fever, or was it always
well,
more
not
controlled?
that way, no, but there was individual homes, you know, they had their home, but they had so many of them, the doctors couldn't, they didn't have that many doctors here, they only had about 2 or 3 doctors, and the town was so small, you see. So they had to bring them to this hospital, and that's where they take care of them. And they had Dr. Charles Gelke, and they had Dr.
Rosner.
Huh?
Dr. Rosner?
Dr. Rosner, yeah, Dr. Charlie Rosner. And then they had an English doctor here, but he couldn't get no prescriptions filled because he never was registered as an American doctor. He wouldn't, old Dr. Fowler lived on 3rd Street between Lavoisier and Lafayette. He didn't take it. So some people went to him, but of course, he had a hard time getting prescription filled.
Well, now that was something. I was going to the school down here. This was the Gretna Primary #1. And, well, it was just a Gretna Primary school because there was no #2 at that time. But they built another on Amelia Avenue. They built a #2 school over there. But we were going to school there, and Katie Peebeck, my cousin, was the principal of the school. And we were dismissed. They told us that they were going to have to convert it into a hospital. Oh, and we were all crying and didn't know what we were going to do because we were going to have to leave school. Well, we were out for 2 months, almost a little over 2 months, until they got situated with this thing. They had to get it straightened out because people were dying like flies, and they were bringing them into the hospital, bringing them into the school, as the hospital was called, And you could go to the corner from my house. The school was right on the next corner. And I'm telling you, you could just see them bringing them in there. And they were bringing out the same people about an hour or 2 hours after they were bringing them in. It was something awful. And then that kept up for about over 2 months. Then they put it back into the school. You know, they converted it back. And
What did people do to keep from getting the flu?
well, there was just nothing in the world that they knew what to do. The doctors didn't even know, because that was an epidemic that came up and just surprised everybody, you see. It was really, really a surprise because it was so sudden and nobody knew anything at all about it. But they gave them medication. They gave them the medicine that they gave the same people that they were given in the hospital, you see, if somebody stayed at home, because they couldn't get them all into the school.
To think one ambulance for the whole parish of Jefferson, 1,300 men.
What year was that?
Back in about 1947. It started with, I was secretary to the David Crockett Fire Company. I received a bulletin, brochure in regards to a Mulligan iron lung. At that time, Crockett had the only piece of respiratory equipment on the West Bank. It was a pulmotor. There was 2 people, it was Bill Strett and myself, knew how to operate it, and I'd say we killed more people than we saved with it, because it was the type of unit that you sutured the tongue, to clamp the tongue to the side of the lip, and you put the mouthpiece over, and it just pumped backward and forward, and if the suturing or the clip slipped, you force the tongue down their mouth. We're very cautious about using it. So I brought it up before the fire company, asked them, what do they think about buying a Mulligan portable iron lung? They said, well, suppose you take it over and see what you can do. When I start looking into it, I found out it was a 2 valise type unit, one with the chest shields and one with the mechanical equipment. So I said, I'm going to have a place to put this. We can't put it on a fire truck. So what I did, I went around to all the corporations, there were 62 of them on the West Bank, and asked them if they'd ask their employees to contribute towards buying an ambulance rescue unit. And they all did. I went to all the schools, and the school children pitched in. And then finally we raised, at that time, just $27,000. Floyd Umbeck built the unit for me. And when we started this thing and got the money coming in, Crockett withdrew their sponsorship. They said it was affecting the raising of funds for the fire company. So I didn't know what to do, but I had some friends in Westwego Fire Company, so they picked the sponsorship up. And that was the reason why, when we bought it and put it in operation, we operated out of the Westwego Fire Station, so it'd be equidistant from the East Bank as well as the West Bank. And how we worked it, the fire chauffeurs at the fire station, when they got the call, would take the unit to the scene of the accident. They would radio me, and no matter where I was, I would leave and meet the ambulance at the accident and go to the hospital.
The first major industry to settle in the area was, I believe, the Union Oil Company, and then they had the Southern Cotton Oil Company, which was the world's largest producer of cottonseed oil, such as Snowdrift and Wesson Oil.
Somebody mentioned the cottonseed plant. Where was that?
You had several of them. You had the N.K. Fairbank Company, you had the Southern Cotton Oil Company, you had the Seaboard Refining Company, the Gulf and Valley Oil Company, and then the rest of them with other business. You had the Union
What did they
Seed-
do there? What did they do with those companies?
Extract cottonseed oil from the cottonseed. They'd take the shells off, and then they'd press the corn, the meats, and that's how you got the
We
cottonseed
had
oil.
a pig fertilizer company down
Then
here.
you had to pick for it. It was
You
Union
see,
Seed and Fertilizer Company, then it
Big
became the
City
pig
Southern
fertilizer.
Southern Cotton Oil Company. I went to work there when I was 18
We had a lot
years
of
old.
people
What
hired
do they use the
pig
cottonseed oil for?
Well,
Cooking, Snowdrift, you know
see the way they
Snowdrift
use
and
it?
Western oil? That's cottonseed oil.
Oh,
Well, that's where the oil,
That's cottonseed oil?
yeah.
you see the way they used to do
That was
that?
where it was manufactured, right here in Gretna.
I'll tell you how that evaporates comes on up. I worked there when I was 18 years old. See, they had a place they used to call the press room. They had a place they used to call the lint room. They had machines, and it would take that cotton off the seed.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It would run just like
Yeah, it was
you
wrapped.
bolt You bolt goods up, it run a machine and bolt up, and when they get a bolt, a big bolt, they'd take it off and run the seed through it and clean it. And they used to take the seed and put it in a cooker and put steam to it, and they'd cook it up. And after they'd cook it up into a cooker, they'd go to work, and they had another cooker made an orange peel that come down like a funnel, and they'd draw that up in there, draw it from out of there, and they had a pan about that wide and about that long with a handle on the end, and they'd run it in there like that, and it would fill up, and there'd be a sack on the bottom, and then they'd put the sack on the top after they put it over. And they had presses. You ever heard of hydraulic pipe?
Sure.
Hydraulic pipe, like a quarter-inch hydraulic pipe. It had a quarter-inch hole in it, but that thing was about 1 inch thick. You ever seen it, Lloyd? It was about that thick.
I worked this Southern, I know.
Now see, in other words, I'm a steam fitter by trade.
Yeah.
All like that's all they ever done.
Right.
But so what you used to do, draw that out, and then put that, just like you got a rack, you're putting something on a rack, one on the top of the other, and that press was about, say, 8 foot high. They'd put all them pans in there, and they'd open the valve, and that thing would go shut. And it would squeeze all the oil out that seed. And they'd take that oil to the refinery. What they'd do, after they'd go to work and press that out and get the oil out of there, they'd send it to the refinery. The oil would go to the refinery, and they'd refine that. And they'd take philosophy and everything else and put into that oil and refine that. And all that stuff goes through a filter press. A filter press is an outfit, it's a big outfit with canvas on all the plates, the filter press. And they'd run that oil through there, and that would filter that oil. And then they had a place they used to call the Western. And the Western had coils in there with about 210 degrees of heat running, circulating that through a kiln. It was a furnace on the bottom, just like a boiler, flying with oil or gas. And that's what they used to do, run it through the kilns. And that's how the Western oil is made. Now, they wasn't finished yet. The yellow meal would be a cake. And they had a machine would take that sack off. It was on a conveyor. And that machine would take that sack off of there. And that cake, you know what that would be? That's yellow meal that was feed for cattle. Not to interrupt, here's something else with the oil. They had the hulls. They used to sell the hulls to the cattle. That's all come out of cotton.
Right.
Right.
Sorry.
See, the cottonseed produced hulls for the cattle, cotton for clothing. Then, like he says, the seed was cracked, and then oil would get out of that, and squeeze the oil out the seed, out the shell, you see. Then the shell would be thrown into the hull shed where they'd feed cattle, and then the meat, where the oil came out, that the meat of the seed, that was used, the oil was used to be refined and for edible purposes. And then the cake, it was a meal that was left, the residue that was left out after the oil was out. They used that as called a cottonseed meal, cakes of it, and they feed that, sell it, and feed that to animals. So the cottonseed was a productive item in the whole seed. You use the fur on it, the cotton on it, you use the shell, the hull, you use the oil out of the meal, out of the kernel, and then you use the meal, what was the residue from the oil, you see.
Was gambling really as widespread as we're led to believe?
Well, as I understand from lots of the old-timers, it was even a lot more widespread than I ever suspected. And of course, there have been copious newspaper accounts of everything that went on with gambling. That's how Jefferson got its name, the Free State of Jefferson.
Did you have to cover any gambling stories that they didn't like?
Well, I was friends of the gamblers, see, and I was also friends of the newspaper, working for the newspaper. So we had a man at the state's desk that every once in a while they get a communication in the office that there was gambling going on, you know. So one day he got a notice. Frank Clancy was the sheriff at that time. Somebody called in the office. Of course, I guess they knew it already, but as long as they didn't say nothing about it, they kept quiet. The paper did, you know. So somebody called in the office and told them that there's gambling right across the street from Frank Clancy's office. All he's got to do is cross the street on the side of, that was when this was the courthouse here, the City Hall. All he's got to do is cross Huey Long Avenue, or Fornicus Avenue, and he can go right in Fink's Billionaire and gamble all you want, horse races and all. But when the city desk got that letter, you know, well, they got in touch with me and they said, listen, what's going on there? There's gambling going on over there. I said, yeah? I said, so they said, go see what you can see about it. I said, well, okay, I'm going to see. So I came on over. I used to go to the office every day. At that time, we didn't have teletypes in those days. You had to type it and bring your stuff over, you type it in the office. So I went around, and the next morning I got up, and I usually had to have it going to the corner of Huey Long and First Street and buy me a paper, you know, get the paper. So I walked up the street, past the Billionaire. It was called the Billionaire Cafe. It was a ballroom in the front and a bookie joint in the back, you know. So I passed there, and I seen the man that run it. His name was Herbie Fink. Spoke to Herbie. The fellow that run the bookie in the back, his name was Southern Lewis. Spoke to them. I said, how's everything? They said, fine, all right, everything's all right. And I said, nothing wrong? I said, yeah, no. So I walked out the ballroom, and I went up to the corner and got my paper and came back and went in the Gretna courthouse then, and I went in Clancy's office. Well, Clancy was there. So I said, can I come in? Yeah, come in, what you want? I said, listen, I said, we got some stuff that's liable to come out in the paper now. I said, about the gambling. He said, yeah. I said, well, it said the gambling house is right across the street from your office, and all you got to do is just cross the street, or get one of your deputies to cross the street and make a bet, and you can do it. Well, I'll be damned. I said, so what you want me to tell the paper? He says, I'll tell them I don't know anything about it. I don't see no gambling. He says, you see any gambling? You couldn't see gambling inside the building. So I went back to Frank Allen, the city editor, and I said, man, I went over there. I said, they might have a little pinochle game or something like that. I said, but I never seen anything going on over there. I used to tell people after that, so how come you done that? I said, listen, these are my friends over here in Gretna. I said, and I'm going to do right by the paper. I said, but if I say too much about my friends in Gretna, I said, then the paper gets back at me and gets mad at me for some reason or other, and it fires me. I said, I got to face these friends in Gretna.
You told me that you used to work in the gambling office. How did that happen?
Well, we were allowed to run the only gambling house in the city of Gretna at one time, upstairs at the fire station. And it was done due to some political involvement that we had with our membership. And at first, I wasn't old enough to work. We just ran Keno, no other type. And I wasn't old enough to work inside, so I worked outside on the back porch selling sandwiches and soft drink. When I was 18 years of age, then I went in calling, writing duplicates. And then later on, I got a job over at Charlie Corner's old Southport. I was a duplicate writer, Keno caller, blackjack, 6 and 8, and roulette, anything, you name it.
Was gambling really as wide open at one time in the parish as I've always heard it was?
It was. It was more wide open than most people thought, because in the gambling houses, everything, is plush. In other words, you'd walk into a gambling house with the plush carpets and everything. The small gambling houses, they didn't do too much then. But the big houses like Charlie Corner and Manex Carver and a bunch of those big wheels that operated, they were sort of kingfish. And one of the big reasons, they they had a big say in politics. When I raised money for the ambulance site, Frank Clancy helped me by letting me go to all the gambling houses along with the man who used to go every night and tell each one of them to give to me whatever they could afford that night towards the ambulance, and that's how I was able to raise the money.
What was the biggest story you covered when you were writing for the paper, do you think?
The biggest
Yeah,
well, it was
one that stands out in memory.
it was a kind of a race riot.
A race riot?
Race riot. It was a kind of, it seems as though it was on a Mardi Gras. I don't remember what that year was. It must have been in the early 20s. That the people of Gretna used to go across the river to see all the parades. They didn't have many parades over. In fact, they didn't have any over here. And they'd go across the river to see the parade. And usually they'd go to St. Charles Avenue. You see, catch the Jefferson Parish and go there. Well, these couple of colored fellas, they decided that they were going to take over the town. So they had, they got a group together, a group of colored fellas, you know, Negroes. And they said, well, we're going to wait until most of the people are gone across the river to look at the parade, and then we're going to take over the town, and sack the town, you see, and take it. So one of the colored fellas, or somebody among the colored people, notified some of the white people. And when they found that out, they said, well, we're going to show them. We ain't going to the parade. So a lot of the men, well, women folks might have went, but the men stayed home. Boy, they really started. They brought every colored church down in Gretna, every black church. Some of them had guns. They went under the floors, you see. They were going to use them after the people got out, but they caught them in time. And, well, then they had a hall. They called it the Wolves Forest. They organized, and they first had it over here on 7th Street, between ULO, which was Copernicus Avenue at that time, and the next street, which was Cuvier Street, which is now Wire Street. And they had a clubhouse there. Well, then they got bigger, so they built a 2-story clubhouse over on Richard Street, which I think is still Richard Street now. And they had a big wooden 2-story building, and the whole thing was framed. So J.B. Downhour was the sheriff of Jefferson Parish at that time. That was that administration, so I know it was in the 20s. Well, he used to go on the East Bank a lot. He used to like to shoot dice, you know, and stuff like that, and they had that over on the East End, you know, Bucktown. So he was across the river, and this committee of white men, they told him, they said, now listen, Sheriff, you go over on the East Bank, particularly so tonight, because you got business over there. Says, we have business over here, but you keep away from here. So they got the guy. They were formed, I don't know where they formed at, but they formed somewhere. And they had big calcium brushes, wide brushes, and cans of gasoline. And they started from the bottom floor, they started at the top, on the 2nd floor, and they painted the walls with gasoline. And they came downstairs and painted the walls downstairs with gasoline. And then they got outside, and when they got outside, they threw a torch in. And then I was in the fire department at that time. I was the chief of the fire department, David Crockett Fire Company. And they told me, they said, don't you bring the fire engine out there. Don't you save that house. So that's what they did, but that hall went down.
If I wanted to rediscover the history of Gretna by taking a walk around, what would I see? Where would I go?
I'd first tell you to go to the Gretna City Hall. It's located in the middle of the U.E.P. Long Avenue Commons on 2nd Street. It began as the 6th Jefferson Parish Courthouse. It was constructed in 1907 at a cost of $74,000. And then I'd move you over to Lafayette Avenue to the David Crockett Fire Hall. It was constructed in 1859. It's a 2-story building, and it was put on the National Register of Historic Places in 1983. Of course, the Gretna City Hall was also put on the National Register of Historic Places in 1983. And then I'd take you to see the little David Crockett pumper. It was built in 1876, and it was the first object to be placed on the National Register from Louisiana. It will be housed in the David Crockett Museum once the museum is set up, And just last week we were privileged to have the state declare the David Crockett Museum the official Louisiana Firemen's Museum. From there I'd take you down Huey Long Avenue again to the Memorial Arch. It was built in 1923, and it lists soldiers from the Spanish-American War, from the Civil War, from the War between the states, from World War I and World War II. It was erected through a committee of citizens who wanted to preserve the memory of the war dead from all of Jefferson Parish. From there, I'd take you to the Texas Pacific train station, which is located on the Huey Long Avenue Commons at 3rd Street. That little depot was built in about 1901 or 1902. It has characteristic overhangs and wrought iron brackets. It's now used by the City of Gretna for some of their operations. And then I'd take you another block down to the Southern Pacific train depot. That was built in 1906. It was never used as a passenger terminal, but it was used as a relay station. And in 1984, the Gretna Historical Society acquired the little depot, had it moved back to its original site on 4th Street, and renovated it as a gift shop and tourist information center. We understand from some architects that it's very rare in the South to have a depot in that particular style. It's called the ornamental or stick style. And from there I take you across the street to our post office, which was built in 1936. And in front of the post office we just planted a little tree which was grafted from a tree planted by Andrew Jackson behind the White House in 1830 for his wife Rachel, and we were lucky enough to get one of the small trees to plant as a legacy for the sesquicentennial. And from there I would take you a block down to the Gretna Primary School, which was the site of the temporary hospital for the influenza during 1918. That school was built in 1911 and it was the first public school in the area. Before that we had the Gretna Academy, but it was touted to be a semi-private school, not a public school as such. The Gretna Primary School had 4 grades there. And from there I would take you around the corner to the Most Holy Sacrament Infant Jesus Convent. That was built in 1907. That was built in 1899 with a little annex in 1907. It was used as a convent and a boarding school for about 70 or 75 years. And from there I would take you around the corner to the St. Joseph's Catholic Church, which was built in 1926. But the parish actually dates back to about 1857, when the first Mass was said by some Redemptorist priests who came across the river from New Orleans. The inside of the church is quite magnificent. They have huge Stations of the Cross, which were carved from an 18-ton slab of Carrara marble in Italy. And from there, I would probably just take you around the corner and show you some of the typical house styles. At 620 Newton Street, we have a large white house with 3 large columns. It's a double shotgun house, very typical of the houses of the area. And a little further down on Newton and across the street, we have what was once touted as the tallest house in Gretna. It was a house built by the Tillisons, I guess around the 1920s or so. I'll probably take you to the Leipzigen Funeral Home over on Amelia Avenue. It was built by the Charles Kerner family about the 1930s. Charles Kerner was the owner of the largest gambling establishment in the greater New Orleans area, known as Southport. It was on the east bank of the river at the Orleans-Jefferson line. And then from there I'd probably take you over to Huey Long Avenue to the Albert Samuel home. It's a large, rambling mission-style home which is now owned by the Bernardi family. That home and the Leipzigen Funeral Home and the Brunnis home on Newton Street are the most pretentious homes that we have in Gretna.
Thank you, Dr. Curry. It sounds like there's a lot to Gretna, Louisiana. Thank you for being with us. Join us again for Jefferson Genesis. Next time, we may be telling the story of your little bit of home here in Jefferson Parish.